Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing vanilla Haqqislam versus Toha, and the scenario is Frontline. Now, I wouldn't typically play the same faction back to back on the channel except under relatively unusual circumstances, or if I was, say, training for an event or something like that. But in this case, I wrote a couple of lists ahead of the last battle report, and one of them I wanted to let cook for just a little bit longer and revisit, and it's this list here. This list is, look, frankly, it's a little bit of a meme list, but it's attempting to make use of at least one of the new profiles that arrived with the release of reinforcements into the broader combat pool, and a few ideas that are kind of fun to play with, in particular now that we have access to pieces like the Burkut. I don't know if it's an excellent list, but it is kind of a fun list and it was interesting to play. So what have we got going on here? Firstly, we have the offensively oriented version of the Haqqislam Irregular package, so no Dalami or Metalwea. Instead, we have a Coom Rider, a Liberto Mine Layer, Zamira, that's the Berserker twin, and another Coom Rider. I would love to have one of these twins be Zelekia, and you can do so, but you need to dial the meme down by about another 5% for that to happen. After that, we have, in the rest of the first combat group, we have a Fanus remote, two Bereed hackers, one regular hacker, one killer hacker. These will almost always be in my Haqqislam lists. And the meme begins with the Sundukbut Mine Layer Viral Rifle. Now, this piece is not necessarily bad, but it is very expensive. It tends to displace other more powerful pieces. And frankly, whenever I've used it, it has failed me. There is one Sundukbut profile that has consistently performed for me, and that is the Neurosynetics AP Spitfire. Everything else has kind of eaten dirt every time I've tried to play it, but in many cases that is anecdotal rather than necessarily a reflection of the unit. Now, the niche, regardless, for the Sundukbut Viral Rifle Mine Layer, just apart from the fact that it slams 3 tokens out onto the midfield, which is pretty cool, is that it is a moderately passable 0.5 SWC firepower piece that sages itself in the midfield and then attacks. It is limited to rifle range bands, and it has low ballistic skill at just 13, occasionally benefiting from surprise, but if those viral rifles hit something, they will absolutely do damage. If you can work a way to support the Sundukbut with an engineer, frankly, I would still prefer the Neurosynetics AP Spitfire, but that builds the list around it a lot more than the Viral Rifle does, which can serve as both a slight ARO piece and an offensive element. We then have Saladin and a guided missile remote. Part of why, in this case, the Sundukbut is downgraded from the Neurosynetics version is that it lets me have enough SWC for the guided missile remote, and the way this list is going to play, we'll see in the second combat group, really warrants including a way of attacking asymmetrically and then forcing my opponent to engage through my defenses. And that is because in Combat Group 2, in addition to the Coom Raider, we have a Rem Racer +1 ballistic skill hacker, two Shehab total reaction bots, and then a Burkat engineer with two Nazmat remotes. We're rounding the list out with a Hassassin Fidei at 25 points. That brings us to 6,300. So what is this list trying to do? It's a double total reaction bot list that is then trying to build an attack package of extremely efficient, disposable, one-way, dogged combat irregulars. So who go out, trade very, very well, and then die, meaning that there's nothing for my opponent to easily clean up. All they've killed is like a 7 or 11 point model, and then they're forced to again attack into these defenses that I've built, or uses guided missiles through a combination of pitchers and hackers and etc. to again force my opponent to try and break through my defenses. We're trying to make the Shehabs very live, and then we have a really high quality combat engineer in the form of the Burkut, so that we're not like wasting a combat group slot on some random Narrowjune. We actually have a model that can fight and kill. Important to note, because this has actually come up in previous lists that I've showed on the channel, this is a 9-6 split, but remember that this is a Saladin list, so the intention is that pieces will move around between combat groups. For example, in that second combat group, we might find ourselves on the first turn moving a Hassassin Fidei into the first group, or we might not, depending on what it is that we would need. And in this game, pieces would move all over the place. I would use Saladin's ability, I think, 2 out of 3 turns. Now, this list is trying to do something kind of cute, but it is kind of interesting and it is kind of fun. And at least in this circumstance, having the Sundukbut as a model with structure gives me some interesting edge cases or advantages to use because we are playing into Toha. Now, Toha are never not a scary faction to play into, and I like this list a lot. This list is another attempt by local Ed, very good player, regular tournament finalist, etc., in his journey on learning Toha, and in particular learning Toha as a step away from Spiral Core, which is one of his main factions. On this learning journey, he's making a really nice kind of continuous use of pieces that he would be using in Spiral Core now, which he's trying to use in Toha, but drifting sort of like toward his own style, which to an extent is toward the Toha mean. And there are a lot of cues in this list from, say, for example, the Toha list that I took to CanCon, but also with Ed's own spin and making a lot of the use of the pieces that I think he finds compelling. So we have two triads in this list. We have a Sukhwhale HMG, a Sakyul Paramedic, and a McCall. Excellent triad. Have used it myself. It's very good. Then we have a Tackwheel Chain of Command Spitfire, a regular Light Shotgun Kael'tar, and a McCall. This is an interesting Haris because it puts a lot on the Tackwheel Spitfire. I use it less than other people do for that reason, basically because I don't like having so much concentrated on the tack wheel in terms of do or die. It's a totally serviceable gunfire, but fighter. Burst 5 at BS13 will get things done, but really for me the value proposition of tack wheels is the ferroware. It's not the gunfighting, and if I can find the points for it, I would much rather combine a Chain of Command combi tack wheel with some other piece with a gun. Generally speaking, that might be a Sakyul, which is a worse gunfighter than a Tackwheel, but quite cheap. Or it might be preferably a Sukhwhale, who is a better gunfighter than a Tackwheel. Now, the downside of doing that is you have to find the points, because a Tackwheel with a Spitfire is only 6 points more than a Tackwheel with a combi, and it lets you run the group as kind of light. All of the points really are invested into the Tackwheel, and that frees up points for things like Samsa. Samsa is a new addition that I personally haven't played with in Toha, but who is a very scary piece, admittedly with a wide range of performance. If he takes a hit, he's going to die a lot of the time, and then 30 points goes down the drain, and he's an infiltrating non-camouflage specialist. But on the other hand, he has plasma. Therefore, the high watermark is incredible, not least because he can gunfight. He has Ballistic Skill 13, Nemetism, and Super Jump. He's a scary piece if he's allowed to tee off. We then have a Diplomatic Delegate, a Motorized Bounty Hunter, and then an Unlinked Chain of Command Kael'tar. This piece, again, 28 points is pricey, but I have used this piece a lot because what it does is it gets you a third Symbiomate. And Symbiomates are still very, very good even in N4. They are a pain to chew through, and this list has 3 pieces it wants Symbiomates on, not just 2. So we're absorbing the cost here to get the third Symbiomate so that the Sukhwhale can have one, the Gunfighting Tackwheel can have one, and then the Nickel in Combat Group 2 can have one. Ed splurged for a Mine Layer profile here. It's only 2 points and it gets you Mines and Mine Layer in the DZ, which will combine nicely against my list with a Liberto Mine Layer. Then we have a Tackwheel, +1 Order Lieutenant. This is a super just useful, versatile, powerful piece. And then 2 Chaxa Auxiliars rounding out the list. So I like this list a lot. I think it is flexing in a direction that Ed will make use of, but it has some great pieces. The only thing that it's missing, quote unquote, and the compromise that is being made by having this Tackwheel Chain of Command is that there's just one ARO piece in the form of the Nickel. And that is by no means bad, but in this game we would see I am going to absolutely break my wrist just dealing with the Nickel on the first turn. We'll get to that in a moment. A second ARO piece, even frankly the Sukhwhale HMG standing up, might well have broken me. And that's something that Tohaa can do because you have these serviceable gunfighting pieces that are linked, that can have Symbiomates. Having an option in a Tohaa list to present at any point during the game multiple credible AROs that always take 2 or 3 orders to bring down, even with high level firepower, can be very strong. So we're playing Frontline, which means 4 classifieds, and these are the 4 that I selected. The theme of these 4, apart from telemetry, which is quite easy for my list to do and which I'll attempt to do during the game, is that these are the Bertok classifieds. He can really do a ton of classifieds. He is a heavy infantry that is a veteran and is an engineer, which means that, so for example, I had to choose between HVT, reverse engineering, and sabotage, and the Berkut was the only piece in my list that could do either of those. So I went with reverse engineering on the grounds that although it took a role where a sabotage didn't, and that would bite me in the ass, I could do it with a peripheral. Otherwise, net undermine I can do with a few different pieces. It's usually a reliable, challenging but doable thing to score. And then vigilance, I have multiple heavy infantry or medium infantry in this list, so I felt comfortable with vigilance as well. These are a serviceable set of classifieds, and I was pretty happy with them, although I would very much have liked to have seen whatever the classified is called that triggers when you repair a unit with either engineer or doctor. Now, Ed wins the roll on a 13 versus my 1, and he elects deployment on this side of the table. This is a little bit of a calculated risk in this particular game, but if anyone can defend against my faction, it is Toha. There's not going to be a decapitation strike. Ed has 2 chain of command pieces. I can't just go after his LT. And what he is banking on basically is that he can conservatively play over the course of the game and then use that Toha combination of a huge amount of Eclipse smoke and the ability to move a fair amount of points at once thanks to their link teams to bomb into scenario zones and secure the win off of the back of the scenario. Toha are quite good at this as a play, and so it's going to be down to me to find a way to stop that. So I'm obviously deploying first. I elect to go first as well. And the major thing that we're looking for here for me is where am I going to put my total reaction bots? In the end, I put them together on this rooftop, serviced by a single little remote attached to the Burkut. But I think that may have been a mistake. What I was concerned about basically was that it would be kind of too easy if I split them up. I couldn't find good lines of fire that I liked. This position here had lines down this direction, down here, including underneath this crate assembly. I could see quite a lot of the table, but I could also have done that with just one total reaction bot. Ultimately, I put the second one in this location because with like a couple of minutes of looking, I couldn't find a second location that I really liked. But that is kind of the thing about going first and deploying in a total information vacuum. I chose to stack them, so I had a single point of strength. But with more practice with this list and with total reaction bots in general, I suspect I would be better at finding multiple places for them. Other than that, we have built a nest of camouflage markers in the middle here. Ed immediately identified, simply by the information that was available to him, that this had to be a Sundukbut mine layer and a Libertos mine layer. The mines are the orange tokens, they are the only ones with Mimetism 3, and then there is this little mess of Mimetism 0 camouflage markers here. This one here, in the most likely position to be exposed to a flanking shot from no cover, that's the decoy. This is the Libertos, and this is the Sundukbut. This building is see into or out of, but not through, and so the Sundukbut is just positioned at the doorway, so it can see into this building without being seen, for example, from here. These are our decompression zones. These are the QAZ zones, so they are the dangerous saturation zones, but they have been placed in both instances to allow troopers past them, like this and like this. Ed placed this one quite cunningly. He had to eyeball this, but what he went for and succeeded at is that this gap here can be traversed by a silhouette 1 or 2 model, but not by a 3 or 4 model, perhaps identifying that he was likely to be playing against bikes with my Haqqislam. Otherwise, we've deployed hackers in relatively advanced positions. The Bereaved Killer Hacker is down here. The Bereaved Hacker is down here. The Burkut itself is here. There's a biker here, another biker in this direction, and my reserve drops are Zamira and the Assassin for Day. This is not necessarily as good against Toha, but I really like that as a reserve duo with Saladin, because Zamira really benefits from making a one-way trip on the first turn of the game. She's very good at that, and reserving her often lets me put her in a position where I can deploy her impetuous, so she'll be one of my 2 reserves. For Ed's part, a great deal of his strength is concentrated in this part of the table. There are Chaxa Auxiliars hanging out behind different barricades. The Sukwel HMG team is on the rooftop here. The Tackwheel Officer Spitfire team is spread out in this space here. This is Ed's turret, and then the chain of command Kael'thar is on the very back of the table edge back here. The Lieutenant Tackwhale is in this position down here, and then this is absolutely immaculate positioning. It's cut off slightly by the photograph, but this is the Nickel and it's mine. And this is immediately going to be the focus of my entire first turn, because this position is nightmarish stuff. So, and it's making total, like, immaculate use of the Sapper rule that the Nickel has. So firstly, its back is against the table edge. It is facing in this direction, which means it is impossible to get around behind with a Assassin for Day, because there is physically no space to put a model up against the table edge not being in its front arc. Secondly, its lines of fire, it has a like 50-inch line of fire down this line here, which is only possible to get by grace of the Sapper rule. Secondly, it has an almost equally long, easily more than 32-inch range line of sight. I'm not trying drawing that properly, but like underneath from this total reaction bot, underneath these crates can be seen as well, where it will be imposing a -9 on my total reaction bot, thanks to a combination of range, mimetism, and cover. So it's locking off basically any approach up this any of these paths up the table will be seen by the nickel when they cross like this line here. And that means basically I have to deal with this damn thing on the first turn. I have to. I don't have any alternative. It has to go down. I'm not in a white noise faction. That thing is going to keep sitting there and keep shooting me unless I deal with it. Now, I am tempted, regardless, to deploy the Hassassin for Day over here next to Samsa, because that is potentially a very clean kill that trades up the Hassassin for Day without needing to make an impersonation roll. Just walk into contact with Samsa and try and kill it. But I don't do that because, in a sense, Samsa is bait. Obviously, there is a, almost with 95% certainty, there is a Libertos waiting for my Hassassin for Day's deployment. And wherever I put the Hassassin for Day, it's going to attract the Libertos as a counter deployment. And in this particular instance, if I sit next to Samsa, I am just going to end up with a Libertos bottling me in, killing me for free when I go after Samsa. And I don't want to make that necessarily a trade. One order and 25 points for 30 points with a chance of failure is fine, but it's not going to solve this problem. And so I put the Hassassin for Day down here, where it immediately gets counter-deployed by the Libertos, and I put Zamira down here because I am going to need more than just one piece to deal with the Nikul. Anything that goes into it is going to be a single wound piece. It is going to cop a mine on the way in and potentially die, and the Nikul has a symbiomate. So I'm going to need to send multiple pieces after this Nikul to bring it down. So I commit to not attacking it piecemeal, defeat in detail. I'm going to go after this and I'm going to kill it on the first turn, and we'll play the rest of the game from there. So Ed strips orders for my first combat group, and we begin the assault. Zamira has a nice clean impetuous move up and around here. Then she moves around to here and dodges. And then I have the option of berserking, but I don't take it. Instead, I move around. So she moves, by the way, she did this movement to here, gets to about this position here, which triggers this mine, which I wanted to do, and she successfully dodges the mine and then moves around to here. So one mine is out of the way, successfully dodged. We then move up and around this way, occupying this position here, tempting a response. The Nikul, she cops this mine. This mine here detonates. Go away, Popper. This mine here detonates. The Libertos actually does not respond. It has the option to, but it declines to, and the Nikul shoots. The Nikul whiffs the shots. Zamira rather, goes dogged from the mine, and I put 2 shotgun templates into the Nikul, which wounds it. Excellent. I actually have the possibility, because the Nikul got wounded from that attack, I actually have the possibility, and because Zamira didn't die, I have the possibility of putting the Nikul down without losing more than one piece. So at this point, with dogged Zamira, I berserk into the Nikul. The Nikul shoots on the way in and kills Zamira. The Libertos does nothing. It doesn't actually respond. And the Nikul saves both saves. It's BTS 0 against a damage 14 EMCCW, and it passes both saves. So, look, I did wound it through the symbiomate, but that's pretty grim. But that's fine. We have a fallback plan. So the Hassassin for Day begins to move. And literally on the first move, I can't get into CC particularly cleanly here, but I have a shotgun. And so, first move, we move to here. This baits out a response. We get a discover with the Libertos, and then a delay with the Nikul. In response to that, I split burst. So I put 1 shotgun shot into the Nikul and 1 shotgun shot into the Libertos. Both of these models are armor 0 against the template, and Ed aces the Fide with the Nikul, and both models pass their saves. So at that point, it's like, oh, that's a little tilting. That is, I am not sure how to deal with that, but fortunately, this Coom Rider over here is in Combat Group 2, and I still have plenty of orders in that combat group, so we roll up our sleeves and continue the assault. And so the Coom Rider, it actually has to come all the way around here because the Nikul can see sort of to this space there. So it comes all the way around here, and then around here. This is the same path that Zamira took. It actually makes the same dodge, and then we come out to here, and this time, the Nikul whiffs its shot, but I do take a wound and go dogged from the Libertos. Shotguns are hit mode shotguns in this case, put the Nikul down, double crit ironically, which is quite amusing. And then with the remaining order, I run into CC, trade shotguns, and kill the Libertos. So this space of the table has become the graveyard of empires. I have lost 3 models and Ed has lost 2. There is nothing living here at the end of the round. Everything is dead, but I have taken down the Nikul. The preconditions to actually play the game are now satisfied. Now, fortunately, the bulk of the assault weight here has been borne by Zamira's group. Ed did strip orders from Combat Group 1, but all that's been spent, sorry, the bulk of the assault's been borne by Group 2, the Fade and the Coom Rider. All we had to spend was a few orders on Zamira out of Combat Group 1, so we have just a couple of orders left, and so we do the thing that Tohaa hates dealing with, which is we just set up a pitcher network near them. So the Haqqislam Bari, this is the killer hacker over here, moves out and around, and I only have a few orders, but basically it comes out and around here, and along the way, being ballistic skill 15, it lands ballistic skill 12. It lands both of these shots on 15s. I am always happy to have BS 12 rather than 11 pitches. For whatever reason, 11 feels notoriously unreliable. 12 feels reasonably consistent. But we pop one pitcher down here, and then we scoot out and back, and we drop a second pitcher down here. So that does leave the it leaves the Buried somewhat exposed in this position. But we have a repeater here and a repeater here, and what that does is it puts the onus on Toha to deal with them. Now at this point we have a few command tokens. We have 2 irregular orders left in the first combat group, and I decide to speculatively spend a command token. The Haqqislam Buried, Whip 14, back here, decides to spend just 1 command token, just to see if I can land a first try spotlight on Samsa, and we do. So I spend a second command token, and I ace him with a missile. That helps turn this first turn from a horrible but necessary mess into actually kind of okay. We've killed a Nikul, a Libertos, and Samsa. We have heavily exposed a Haqqislam Buried and lost 3 other troops to do it, but that could be worse, particularly against Toha. Now, Toha always have options when they roll into their first turn like this. Ed actually has a number of things that he can do, and in the interest of learning experience, he's going to make a few plays this game, as am I, that are a little bit experimental. In retrospect, and we talked about this after the game, the correct play for Ed was to use the Chaxa on this rooftop, which is in Combat Group 2, to spend the orders that it needs to clear off the 2 pitches in this space. Doing that probably leaves it with enough orders left to clear Spotlight afterwards, but if it doesn't, it's just a Chaxa. Yes, it would be a free kill for me, but it leaves the first combat group totally free to act, and then the first combat group can activate this Harry's team here, start moving out sort of in this space, and take fights with the Sukhoi into the TR HMGs. Now, those are always somewhat fraught, but in this case, the saturation zone actually benefits this one here, actually benefits Ed more than it does me, reduces him to burst 5 and him from burst 5 to burst 4, and me from burst 4 to burst 3, and he has a ballistic skill and mimetism advantage. So he is pretty likely, admittedly there is still risk, pretty likely to put these HMGs and this turret here down, but instead what he does is he breaks the Harry's team here and he uses the Sukhoi HMG. And what he does is he just uses the Sukhoi HMG solo to stealth across the rooftop, take a face-to-face roll, takes 2 orders, but he puts down the Haqqislam Buried. Then he uses his pistols to put down the 2 repeaters, pulls back over here, resets out of Spotlight, and then rejoins the link with a command token. The only downside of this play, so the advantage is this frees up the second combat group to go and do something else. The downside is that it uses up 2 of his remaining 3 command tokens because he has to spend a O12 prestige order, and it doesn't go and kill my pieces on Overwatch. So what Ed uses the orders in the second combat group pool to do is to use the lieutenant orders on his lieutenant, come out and around here and up and around this way into this space here, where he starts doing classifieds. Ed has got a couple of classifieds that the Taquiel can do. This one can't do net undermine, but it can do medium infantry in zone of control of the HVT, and so he moves up, attempts to do that. It takes a couple more orders than he would like, and he pulls back to this position here, guarding his HVT. On the way out, I finally reveal my Sundukbut, and I put the viral combi into him, actually win that face-to-face roll, and he takes 1 of his 2 wounds, so we have a wounded Taquiel lieutenant. That's probably a bit of an overextension. We agree after the game that, yep, the correct thing to do would have been to use the combat group 2 orders to clear the repeaters to free up the Sukhoi. But Toha is a executionally complex faction to play. You always have those kind of decisions because you always have resources intact, and I don't think the decision Ed was made was wrong, but I think in this circumstance, the play that I proposed would have been, and which he agreed with by the end of the game, would have been better. So rolling into my turn 2, I have lost a lot of my expendable attack elements, more than I wanted to. I had to give away 2 motorcycles and a Fade on the first turn, but we haven't suffered catastrophic damage. Most of the damage, in fact, all of the damage that we took, we all suffered in ARO in our first turn. So we've got our full order pools minus those 3 pieces. They're a little fragile, but I'm worried about the ground that I'm making and the fact that I'm really still hemmed into my DZ. So there's a couple of things I do this turn, I think. One of them is good and one of them is a little bit sketch. Firstly is the Lobotos is going to go for a run. And so the Lobotos comes out and around here, and it puts down the tack wheel officer, but it goes dogged in the process. Really the only path for it to follow from there is around this way onto this rooftop to engage the Sook Whale. And the reason why is that if I attempt to come around this way, I'm going to just get mind bulleted by the tack whale, like endgame will kill me before I reach anything on the path around here. So we get up onto this rooftop, we engage this Sook Whale, we successfully strip the Symbiomate but do nothing else, and then the Nikul dies. We then move, I think I do all of that using Saladin to stop the Nikul into the second combat group. So then we pick up the slack with the Sundukbut, which is revealed, and it comes around this way, onto this rooftop. And this is the point where, look, realistically, what should I have done? I should have thrown down more pitches and had a guided missile play. I think it was realistically the right choice to make in this particular circumstances. Missiles are efficient against Toha, sort of. Let me reframe that. Missiles are actually inefficient against Toha because symbiomates are a huge pain to deal with. It is very common when you're making a missile play against Toha for it to take the entire turn to kind of kill one piece. The reasons why missile plays are good against Toha is not the missiles, it's not the active turn spotlights, it's establishing the repeater network that Toha then have to deal with. Because Toha, although they're an order efficient faction, they're order efficient in their mobility, moving multiple pieces forward at once. Individual Toha elements aren't fast and they typically don't have tons of orders. The only way really to exceed your usual 15 order limit in Toha is through the Toha lieutenant. So what this means is that once a repeater network is bracketing a Toha deployment zone, it is usually a huge pain to deal with. Because they have these fire teams, you can start spotlighting multiple exposed members of the fire team, and the fire teams, you can then, at that point, when it's your turn again, the missiles can begin to clean up multiple pieces very cheaply in the Toha list because of that repeater network. So it puts the Toha in this awkward catch-22 where usually they have to do things like use Chaxas or motorized bounty hunters or Libertos to spend like a whole bunch of orders clearing out repeaters, which can really blunt the active turn performance of the remainder of the pieces in the Toha list. On top of that, in this particular circumstance, because I'd managed to strip the Symbiomate off of this Sook Whale, and it really was the last remaining high-quality gun apart from the tack wheel Spitfire, it was exposed to a missile strike. Going after Symbiomate models with missile strikes is usually a recipe for pain, because among other things, they can safely declare reset at least against the first missile, and that can really put you in an awkward situation. So I don't like to active turn missile Toha, unless there's an opportunity, and usually that opportunity is the benefit of establishing that repeater network for subsequent turns. But I don't do that this turn. Instead, what I do is go, the Sundukbut has structure. It's not vulnerable to the same threats that Libertos does. I could move it through different spaces of the board. Instead, I will move it through the same space I moved the Libertos. So I pull it up and around here, up this building here, and then a couple of things happen. The first is that the Sook Whale successfully dodges my chain rifle. The tack wheel officer down here covers the Sook Whale in eclipse smoke, and this Chaxa dodges standing up. So, okay, that's kind of rough. We're going to pop the Sundukbut back down to ground level here. I take a chain rifle. I chain rifle the Chaxa. I cop a heavy flamethrower, and between that and a HMG wound from the previous engagement, the Sundukbut goes unconscious. So I have killed. I may have wounded the Sook Whale, and I have killed the Chaxa, and that's sort of the sum total of this turn. Things could have been better, and it puts Ed in a reasonable position now. This is the point at which I think the game is really hinging on a fulcrum. This is the point at which Ed has sort of further opportunities to pull himself into and win the game, or at least set such an even situation that he can waltz into the final turn for victory. There are a few possibilities that he has here. I think realistically the plan probably is just to try and strip my order pool as much as he can and do classifieds on the last turn as part of a run forward, and that really would be the Sook Whale HMG play. What he chooses to do instead, and it is not unreasonable, is he chooses to go after some classifieds and take a close range engagement. Now, Toha should never take a fair fight. Toha should always engage pieces like total reaction bots from a position of advantage. And the two positions from advantage he has is with the Sook Whale, just engaging them conventionally with higher burst and higher ballistic skill. That is serviceable. or coming up into the building and taking within 16 engagements with a Spitfire, putting these pieces in bad range. The advantage of that play is that it also lets him do some classifieds. The disadvantage is that he still has to clear through certain close range defenses to make it happen. So the team moves up and around, and the first thing that happens that's a bit rough is that the McCall attempts to dodge this mine, and it goes down. It dies from the mine, which means that the Link team is now down to just 2 troopers, so no burst bonus. The second thing that happens is that I have moved my Hassassin Buried forward to this position here, and I'm able to actually, as part of that movement, the tack wheel officer just slips through the zone of control and gets spotlit, and I'm able to successfully spotlight it, at which point we have a little bit of a song and dance back and forth. Finally, what happens is that there is a highly technical series of AROs that manufactures for me an advantageous situation that was worth going for, but which is very, very rare. And so this is what ultimately happened. The tack wheel successfully, its chain of command, it successfully does net undermine. It does net undermine, and it is going to, if it can, it's going to attempt to clear the ARO pieces here, and then go after my HVT. It has the assassinate HVT, make a whip roll, remove the HVT, special objective. What happens is that it moves along this position here, does net undermine, and in the process gets spotlit by my Berid. Taking a spotlight causes a guts roll, which it fails, and it has to, because Ed has moved all the way up to just not in line of fire of these Overwatch pieces. Taking a guts roll forces him to leave my zone of control to escape the danger area, which pushes the tack wheel about 1.5 inches this direction, out of cover and into line of fire of every one of these guns. Also, he's targeted. So this has gone from a situation where he can take these fights one at a time, very carefully, kill them one at a time, and then eventually go after the HVT, into a situation where he is now almost certainly going to die. So what he elects to do is just come around, do the classified, remove my HVT, and although he has a Symbiomate, it turns out that Burst 11 against a targeted model out of cover will kill it through a Symbiomate. And in that case, that's what happens. I fire 4 dice on 14s, 4 dice on 15s, and 3 dice on 16s, and I put the tack wheel down. Now, that's a problem for Ed for 2 reasons. The first reason is it's a very expensive piece, and he needs those expensive pieces to be delivered into the field in the late game to score the zones. And secondly, it's a problem because he now only has 1 chain of command left. I know who his lieutenant is, and I potentially have a play against it that can secure me the game. And I need to take that play because Ed is now up on classifieds. I've only done 1. I'm going to be relying on the Burkut to do a ton on the next turn, and my order pool is getting very slim. So we roll into the 3rd turn. We have the Sundukbut unconscious here. The Burkut is still sitting down here. And the only thing that is important to this turn I'm describing that has not yet been mentioned is I use the irregular order of the Coom Rider on the previous turn just to move it to this position here. So the first thing that we do is that we flip Saladin into the 2nd combat group so that there is a chance the Burkut has enough orders to do all of the things that it needs to do. Then we activate the Coom Rider, and this is kind of the thing that will happen if you put enough good, cheap irregulars in a list, one of them will overperform most of the time. And this is going to be the turn when the Coom Rider overperforms. It activates, it moves around to here. It moves around to here, and I just have to wear this. I move through line of fire of this Chaxa, and I put the Chaxa down, and I fail only 1 roll against the Flamethrower. Damage 15 Flamethrower, armor 1. I have a very good chance of dying here, but I take a wound, and I pass my 2nd roll. I then move the Coom Rider all the way around here. We get line of sight on this Kael'tar Specialist hanging out back here. It is the only remaining chain of command model in Ed's list. I know this because of the SWC count, and also just you wouldn't take 3 chain of command in a list. And he face-to-faces me, and I put it down, which means that Ed at this point is down to 0 command tokens and is in loss of lieutenant on his final turn. Now, that alone is not actually a game win, because if nothing else happened with the game state right now, Ed would win, because I am nowhere near any zones, and he has a 15-point Kael'tar Specialist parked here, and I don't have a single thing with the death of the Coom Raider outside my DZ, and I have fewer classifieds than he does. So we still have work to do, and most of that work will be on the back of this Burkut. So it's going to move up and around here. It's going to move its helper bot out and around this direction. It will move around to here through this doorway, where it will engage the Kael'thas Specialist, and after 2 orders, it will put it down. We will then have the little helper bot will swing by the Burkut, so swing by the Sundarbut and recover it. And at that point, I have 3 orders remaining, including the O12 Prestige order, which I have enough command tokens for, attempting to do as many classifieds as I can. We have a Whip 17 Vigilance roll and a Whip 17 Engineer the HVT roll, and with 3 orders, I do one of those. So I roll 118, 120, and 114, which gets me one of those 3 classifieds, which is a bit rough, but it's not the end of the world. I am securing the HVT, and Ed correctly identifies that basically, in loss of lieutenant with no orders, all he can do is contest his own zone against the 49 points of the Sundarbut. So he does that. He moves the Motorized Bounty Hunter forward, the Diplomatic Delegate forward, and the Sukwale Commando forward. And between those 3 pieces and the Impetuous McCall, that's enough for him to dominate his zone here, which is 1 point, plus he's done, at this point, I think 3 classifieds, so that puts him on 4. I am dominating. I've done, at this point, 3 classifieds, including securing HVT. I have my zone, and I have the middle zone, which I want to say is 2, which puts me on a total of 6. So that is a 6-4 win for Haqqislam. In a tournament, this would give Ed the defensive bonus. He has stayed within 2 points of me, but would not quite qualify for the offensive bonus, scoring 5 points. So a very, very close game that had that Coom Raider that made that run on the final turn, had this heroic Coom Raider that came around here, basically just burned to death against the Shaxxa, Ed would have enough orders probably to swing the final turn. He would have needed to have blown through a few different pieces or just laid a whole bunch of Eclipse Smoke, and that is the more likely thing. The challenge for him is just having, and this is genuinely the challenge, is that he probably would have been forced to kill the Sundarbut, which by the end of my turn had relocated to here and laid a mine behind it. And that's a little difficult. The reason why he would probably need to do that is that at 49 points, even if he'd had full flexibility to move things, it was challenging for him to actually have enough points to outweigh both the Sundarbut and the Burkut that was hanging out in this room. He could easily outweigh the Burkut, but only by moving the Sukwale Commando into that space, which meant basically he needed to kill the Sundarbut. But I think at least one of those things, I think that was doable, which meant that had I not succeeded that run against the Lieutenant on the final turn, there's a very good chance that Ed takes this game by a solid margin. As it was, narrow Haqqislam victory, and a very tight, very closely played, very heavily contested, and excellent game. I hope you enjoyed this. As always, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so either by becoming a channel member or by supporting me via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. I take requests for battle reports, scenarios, armies, lists, etc. Or just if you have questions that you would like to ask, if you'd like to review something that you've written, anything, always happy to engage with and support channel supporters in turn. You can do so via either of those means. As always, I hope you enjoyed this very much, and I will see you next time.